Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I'm, of course, your host, Daniel Rose. My guest today is Dr. Nancy Gonlin. Nancy, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me and inviting me to your show on Archaeology After Dark. I'm really excited to be here. I wonder about your show because it is a wide range of topics, and I was delighted to see that you interview graduate students, undergraduates, professionals, people in CRM, and just the whole gamut of people. So I'm really impressed with your show.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I try to be all inclusive to anyone who, takes the time to actually listen to what I'm saying.
I feel the same way.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I earned my PhD in anthropology from the Pennsylvania State University, and I specialize in the archaeology of Mesoamerica. I am a professor of anthropology at Bellevue College in Washington State, and I teach a wide range of classes in this open enrollment institution. So I teach archaeology, cultural anthropology, and biological anthropology. I have served as editors of journals Ancient Mesoamerica, as well as the Journal of Archaeology and Education. And I am also on the scientific board for the International Conference on Night Studies. And I'm a member of the International Dark Sky Association, which anyone can join to promote dark nights in the present and the future.
And that brings us to what we are talking about today. So, as all of you know, the title of this program is Archaeology After Dark. And Nancy specializes in nighttime archaeology. That's not, digging around in the dark. Oh, I don't condone that. That can be dangerous in all kinds of ways. But this is more about the nightlife, what people do in the dark.
Yeah, so the night is very different from the day in the sense of just natural cycles. The night is cool, the night is dark, the night is more silent, and it's kind of mysterious. And we might picture people of the past just sleeping at night because, well, it was dark. What else could they do, right? And we are so dependent on light that we don't think about other sources of light, such as the moon, for example, which if there's a full moon and it's a clear night, you can actually read by the moonlight.
Yeah, the moonlight. If you're in certain places outside of major cities, you can see just as well as you can during the daytime, just about.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the stars and the Milky Way, there are so many people who have never seen the Milky Way. Can you imagine that? Not having any connection to the universe. It's really incredible to think about that.
Oh, absolutely, and that's something that so many cultures base their either philosophies or religions on, or the alignment of stars, the position of the moon, things like that.
Yeah, this goes back deep in time in terms of who we are as humans and where we think we came from and origin myths. So many origin myths have to do with darkness and people coming out of darkness into the light.
So you specialize in Mesoamerica. How is the nightlife viewed in those cultures?
Well, there's a duality, as there is in many cultures, between night and day, for example. So this duality is pervasive, and you need both parts. You need night and you need day to form a complete whole. So keeping that in mind, the night is or was as important as the day is or was. So this duality permeates Mesoamerican cultures in the past and in the present. So night is an essential part of their culture. And people in Mesoamerica did lots of things at night in the past, such as farming. There are certain times of the day, excuse me, certain times of the month that are better for planting certain kinds of plants or harvesting under certain kinds of moonlight. And perhaps you've heard of the Farmer's Almanac. there are very similar kinds of readings in that farmer's almanac, which is used today in the United States by many farmers.
So when we think about the kinds of crops you're talking about, what comes to mind? Is that something we can actually find on a regular basis here?
Well, if you look at when maize should be planted, there are certain propitious dates. I don't have those particular dates in mind for 2023, but any farmer, especially in the Midwest where a lot of corn is grown, they would know when the best dates are. And this also connects with rain, for example, when rains occur.
So they would also plant not just at night, but in according to the weather cycles, like the rainy season, the dry season, so on and so forth.
Absolutely, because the moon has a regular cycle and the sun, of course, has regular cycles. And all of these bodies, the astronomical bodies, are tracked by humans in the past and the present. We don't think of the moon as affecting us so much today. For example, we might know that the sun is going to set a little bit later in time because it's spring, but most of us might not know that there's a waning moon tonight, for example. Most of us don't look at the phases of the moon today to determine anything about us.
Yeah, that's something that I think people overlook when they study different various cultures, religions, things like that, is the time of the day affects it too. Like people are more active at night, especially in certain places where it's extremely hot during the day.
Absolutely. And there are certain occupations that are better done at night. For example, in one of my edited volumes on the archaeology of the night, there's a chapter that's written by Shadrach Tirukuri and Abigail Moffat, and they study the Bronze Age Zimbabweans. And they find that it's very, very likely that when they did smelting, it was at night because of the extreme heat of producing metal.
So, when you find artifacts, how do you determine that they are used for nighttime activities?
That's a good question that I typically get. And you're an archaeologist, so let me ask you, when you find an artifact, how do you know that it was used during the day?
That is a great question. I guess I'm just biased in assuming that anything I find was used during the day during times of social periods, but also a lot of the dishware and ceramics that we find, especially here in the United States, could easily be used as dinnerware too.
Okay, so if you find an artifact, our default setting as archaeologists is to assume that that artifact was used during the day. We don't think about the time of day when it was used. We just naturally assume that people used it during the day. But there are some artifacts that could easily be used during the night. For example, a simple ceramic bowl that you might think of as perhaps holding maize gruel for eating breakfast in the morning, maybe it was used in a different way. Maybe it was used as a container for coals for some kind of light at night. So we need to have a different perspective and think of artifacts in different ways. And we don't really know when artifacts were used day or night, but our default setting is the day, primarily because humans are diurnal creatures. So our default is the day setting.
That's true. And since you said that, it makes me think that people's patterns of behavior change from day to night. Like, say, the way we are now is people's, inhibitions start to change as the sun goes down. They tend to relax more. They, start drinking here and there, things like that. Things that, people don't normally do during the day.
Yes, the night is an ideal time for some activities. We might think of the night as being ideal for romance, for example, or for entertainment or for drinking, as those are acceptable activities after the work of the day has passed. And night is a time for relaxing and repose.
Yeah, and that's something that holds true today. Don't think that, the culture of night has just changed so much over, so many thousands of years. We still do the same nocturnal practices today that people have done in the past.
Yes, there are many similarities between the past and the present. Once we start digging into the night, so to speak, we can find that people did all sorts of things in the past during the nighttime, and many of those are what we do today in terms of entertainment and relaxing. Whether you're a group of foragers around a campfire and relaxing for the night and dancing and singing. This is something that Polly Wiesner has studied among the Jugponsi, and she has written about nighttime talk versus daytime talk. And I would say that that is something that holds today for us post-industrialists.
Yeah, especially, when around 5 o'clock hits, people stop talking about work and they start talking about, the show that they're currently binging or something.
Right. So when you come home from work and your partner says, "Oh, okay, let's unwind for tonight," and there you unwind, and it's taken that you're not going to talk about work because you're shutting that part out and you're switching gears and you're going to do something else that is going to relax you after a hard day's work.
So, is there a specific nighttime activity that you've studied that stands out to you?
One nighttime activity that is interesting is the amount of rituals that take place at night. And this is true for many ancient cultures, and it's true for many cultures today. I was raised as a Catholic, so midnight mass was very special, for example, or a candlelight service is very special. And if we look at the classic Maya, they documented a lot of things that occurred at night. There's a famous lintel at the city of Yaxchilan in Chiapas, Mexico, and it shows the queen, Lady Shook, and she's engaged in a ritual of bloodletting. And her husband, King Shil Jaguar, is holding this enormous torch. And we are pretty sure that it occurred at night because of the torch, or minimally, it occurred in the dark. So darkness and night are intricately connected, especially for the ancient Maya. If you think of cave uses and how sacred caves are to many ancient cultures, that is something that has persisted into today with the descendants of peoples of the past.
And something I had just thought of, you said jaguar, and that made me think that there are certain cultures that worship, nocturnal animals. That you don't see them during the day, so the rituals that are attached to those animals, like wolves or jaguars here in the Americas, would most likely be done at night.
Well, if we look at names for classic Maya rulers, many of them contain the name jaguar. And the jaguar, of course, is an apical predator in Mesoamerica, Mexico, Central America, and very powerful. So it's not surprising that kings would identify with the jaguar. But the jaguar, of course, is also a crepuscular animal that is very active at dusk and dawn and hunts and has excellent night vision. So there was one study that a friend of mine, Christine Landau, did along with Christopher Hernandez. We wrote a chapter about lunar power and classic Maya kings and how many of them were inducted into their office either during a full moon or during a new moon. So there's definitely a tie-in with the moon and the jaguar and power in classic Maya society.
Yeah, and that's something that people still look at today, even in like popular media, when Mesoamerican cultures are depicted. It's very like torches everywhere, jaguar effigies everywhere, things like that.
There's a lot of symbolism. So other evidence for the night besides artifacts and features like a hearth are art and iconography. And that can reveal a lot about the night and how people viewed the night. Other evidence is in the form of architecture. For example, at the post-classic Maya site of Chichen Itza, there's an observatory. So we know that the people who lived on the Yucatan Peninsula around 1,000 years ago knew very much about the astronomy, and they tracked Venus, they tracked the cycles of the sun and the moon, and all of these were essential elements of their culture.
And that is something that has changed tremendously with the onset of modern technology. Is it becomes more and more difficult to observe the night sky. That doesn't really change where you are. It's becoming more and more difficult everywhere.
That is an issue for today's nights. And this over illumination is something that the International Dark Sky Association is working on to address. And there's also a recent book that's written by that specialist, Johan Eklof of Sweden, called The Darkness Manifesto. And the IDA, International Dark Sky Association, and Dr. Eklof are both huge proponents of reducing nighttime lighting. If you go to the IDA website, there are all kinds of real practical suggestions on how to reduce nighttime lighting in your own home and just outside your own home. That, for example, lights should point down and be covered on the top instead of pointing up and contributing to sky glow. And this abundant lighting is something that is an issue not just for nocturnal species, but all species, including humans. It very negatively affects us.
Yeah, every now and then I see a study that says how light pollution um, affects nocturnal species, especially bats, like you mentioned, because they're a huge part in controlling the pest population everywhere.
Yes, bats eat an amazing number of mosquitoes. And in Alabama, I'm sure that's something you would appreciate more than I do here in the Pacific Northwest. And bats are pollinators. So if you have declining bat populations, it's going to affect agriculture. And the nocturnal species, such as bats that we might think of, or sea turtles that migrate at night, those are kind of the poster children for over illumination and the dangers of over illumination. But in terms of humans and the effects that overlighting has on us, there are connections to increased cardiac problems, insomnia, of course, and possibly even some cancers. So these are dire consequences, and solving light pollution is doable. It's kind of a silent kind of pollution, but on the other hand, it's also a pollution that we can do something about more easily than other types of pollution.
So let me ask you this: the sites that you frequently visit, I assume they're still remote. Can you see the stars and the night sky from those sites still, or is the light pollution a problem there also?
Yes and no. The light pollution has gotten greater in the past few decades, and the pollution that we see from cities, which are ever growing and increasing in numbers, and they're spreading out, it's invading rural areas. So even if you're in a rural area, you might see on the horizon some sky glow from a distant city. But on the other hand, um, I live in Seattle, and if I just start driving east into central Washington, where there is not a large city, you can see far more stars than you can where I live.
Yeah, this is the same kind of situation here in Alabama. You do have to drive a fairly substantial trip just to get out of a major city, even further to actually see something in the night sky if you're looking for something specific.
Right. And there are some constellations. Obviously, the moon is going to still be there, and we can see that even as city dwellers. But most of us who live in cities, and that's most of humanity now, there are more people who live in cities than at any other time in humanity's history, that we haven't seen so many stars. So we're losing our connection to the night sky. And the nightscape, the night sky, that's part of our heritage. It's just as important as saving remains on the ground, for example.
Yeah, so think about how the night sky has impacted people. The earliest sailors used the night sky for navigation. And now, since we have fancy technology and whatnot to help with that, people don't rely on it as much, but people have lost touch with, the roots of that kind of travel. That the earliest people actually made charts that documented the positions of stars in the sky to use for navigation.
Right. Navigating by the stars is something that people have done literally for eons, and it speaks to their knowledge of astronomy. We modern humans tend to underestimate people of the past in terms of their knowledge and abilities, but people all over the world have navigated for thousands of years. There's a book that I read called The First Astronomers that talks about people on the island of New Zealand, the indigenous Maori people, and how they've known for centuries about different constellations and cycles and comets, and they've known how to navigate and in terms of cycles, natural cycles, biological cycles relating to all of this. That is part of their knowledge as well.
So this is gonna just about do it for today. Nancy, do you have any advice for people who want to study nocturnal activities or archaeology in general?
I highly encourage you to look at archaeology as a viable occupation, especially those in cultural resource management, which needs more archaeologists. And if you look at what you recover as an archaeologist, you don't need new data to study the night. You already have the data. So plunge into the night and think about the artifacts and features and architecture and sites in a different way, from a different perspective, and enlighten the night, if you will.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Nancy. That is going to do it for us here today at Archaeology After Dark.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
I've enjoyed having you on the show as well. Thanks again. Bye, everybody.